Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in philosophy we will try and understand philosophy of language, and today we are conducting second lecture in the same series. In this lecture we will try to understand different perspectives to understand philosophy of language, which might include pragmatism, semantics, syntax and semiotics. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Verma is Associate Professor in the Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
Thank you, Amrit. Hello viewers. Today we'll have a second lecture in the series where we have been discussing the different aspects of language, as a subject matter, of philosophy. What is its domain? What could be different aspects? What could be different, perspectives that we could have towards, the study of language. Within philosophy as a discipline, and this is what broadly we discussed in our last lecture, and today we'll be carrying forward the same discussion. So now when we talk about language, there are, so to speak, different things that we do with language. There are different functions that we are able to perform with language. We are able to communicate our thoughts. We are able to command, and so on and so forth. So, and as pointed out in the previous lecture also, it happens to go on so smoothly. But if we look at if we take a closer look on the different things that we are able to do with language, then a different, a whole new world, so to speak, opens itself before us. So first of all, we need to compartmentalize, or we need to look at what could be the different areas, what could be the different departments under which we could broadly lay out the subject matter that we could consider under philosophy of language. So part of it we have already discussed in our last discussion, because depending upon what kind of language use we are talking about, our ways of looking at language as subject matter would change. Say, for example, if we talk about scriptures, if we talk about religious scriptures, then there's a very different set of issues that emerges. So, say for example, religious scriptures, are supposed to be sacrosanct in a certain way. Whatever is whatever content they have, it's supposed to be in a certain way beyond, the regular examination, the regular kind of suspicion, that we throw, that we use in our general conversations. So, when we talk about religious authority ingrained in some of the religious texts, then it's a whole different range of questions that are thrown into relief. Say, for example, we cannot, if we are talking about some sort of highest order questions, which pertain to religion, like who is the ultimate showrunner? I mean, in the sense that who is is there a person? Is there somebody? Is there some divine force behind all that that we see going on in the world? So, if we talk about issues of this order, then obviously we wouldn't entertain more multiplicity of answers probably within a given religion. So there has to be one correct answer to these highest order questions, and if that is the case, and if we believe that those answers are given in any particular religious text, then there could not be many ways of reading it. There couldn't be multiple ways of reading it. Then the issues that come to the fore, in the study of such kind of texts, are very different in nature, which would be more oriented towards what we could call philology. Philology in the sense we'll have to think about how to read a text in order for the meaning to flash forth before us, because there cannot be any multiplicity of meanings. So we'll have to formulate the rules of certain rules of interpretation regarding reading the text and kind of gleaning out a meaning out of them. So in that sphere, the role the set of questions that emerge are more philological in nature than pertaining to some of the other spheres of study. Another thing is like rules of interpretations would also involve trying to understand how the meaning is revealed within the text. Because religious meaning, would come to us. One of the dominant ways of religious meaning coming to us could only be through revelation. So, how this revelation becomes possible? This is, another area of study that we call hermeneutics. In the history of philosophy. So different hermeneuticists have been telling us how to read religious texts in order for the revelation of the meaning within the text to occur to us. So all in all, what I'm trying to put forward here is that depending upon depending upon what kind of text we are talking about, depending upon what kind of function of language we are talking about, depending upon what category of texts we are looking at. The philosophical problems associated within that sphere change. So if we look at some of the later issues that came up, say for example post World War, those are very different set of questions. So probably it's only a conjecture, but probably the reason behind that could be the wars. During the wars, there was a different kind of political agenda which was being catered to general masses, to general public around that time. Certain the language was being used in a certain way to convince people. So the entire aim of what was being said around that time within the social and political sphere was to convince people about the war, that it was for the overall good of the nation. And we are all aware sort of how Nazism and certain fascist forces, the kind of arguments they used. So language was being used in a very different way. Where the persuasion, persuading people, was more important. So language was being used in a rhetorical way. And philosophers around that time thought that it could be a good idea to come up with some kind of mechanism of differentiating between such kind of use of language, where what we are saying seems to be apparently meaningful on the surface, but when we look deeper into it, we find that there's not much argument in it. There's not much reasoning inside it. There's not much logic to it, and then we realize that that the arguments that were being offered to us had nothing but rhetorical force about themselves. Otherwise, they were illogical in a certain sense. So in that direction, if you look at it, we find that some of the eminent philosophers of that time, like Bertrand Russell and so on, they were they were focusing on how to differentiate, how to glean out, how to filter out, how to differentiate, how to segregate meaningful from the meaningless. So many a times, we say things which are apparently meaningful. Sort of a famous example that we talked about in the last lecture also is present king of France is bald, but it may appear to us that I understand the meaning, but on a closer examination, on a logical examination, we'll find that since if we logically symbolize it, the symbolization would be something like that. For all x, if x is the king of France, then x is bald. But to the very first question, if there is an x such that x is the king of France, but there is no king of France, so there is no corresponding entity to x in this symbolization process. And the moment we do this kind of a logical examination, by symbolizing, what somebody may be saying, in sort of, when we logically symbolize it, we immediately discover that what is being said is meaningless in a certain way. So probably the reason behind this could be it may also have to do something with the wars, and also let's not forget even prior to this, there were this set of philosophers who called themselves logical positivists. They were of the view that whatever we say should be such that we should be able to identify the conditions of certain statements that are being made. We should be aware, we should be, the truth conditions of those statements should also be made available to us. So, what these philosophers, many of them were scientists also. So, what they were arguing was that in the name of philosophy, also, and generally speaking, there are so many arguments always on offer in all the disciplines and within political sphere, within social sphere. So, whenever we talk about something, whenever there are statements that we come across in whatever sphere, one essential condition for whoever is making those statements, one mandatory condition should be such that the conditions resulting, that through which we could ascertain the truth or falsity of those statements should also be explicitly stated. So, say for example, if somebody says that there is God, then regarding this statement, how do we ascertain the truth or falsity of that statement? The person who is giving that statement, we should make it incumbent upon that person. We should ask that person what are the conditions under which this statement should be held to be true or otherwise. So they were doing, they were making such demands. This set of philosophers, namely logical positivists, they were making these demands because there was a lot that was being said in around that time, especially by some of the German philosophers, including Heidegger. So the language was being used in such a way that it was very difficult to make any proper ascertainable unequivocal meaning out of those texts. So say for example, Heidegger was using the word nothing in strange ways, in ways generally we don't find the word nothing being used as. He was even using it as a verb, apart from other things. So there were these the language, the words in language, the way they were being used in certain spheres of discussions was such that there was a demand coming from certain set of thinkers that the person must state how to make sure, about the truth condition. Similarly, same kind of demand we could, remains relevant even today. Say, for example, even on TV shows, we find these astrologers talking about certain things all the time, and also in the name of zodiac sign, they are addressing what they are saying. They're addressing to large group of people, and but whenever they are saying something, whenever they're talking about future. If we were to be logical positivists, we should ask them how, what are the conditions under which we could ascertain the truth or falsity of what they are stating. Under which conditions we would be sort of unequivocally be able to state that, see, what you said turned out to be incorrect, or what you stated is basically it doesn't make sense, or so on and so forth. So otherwise, most of the time you find these, some such, studies are not stating these conditions. So, if you don't state these conditions under which what you're saying could be ascertained to be true or false, then you can say anything and go away with it. So, all in all, the effort here was that during war, there were all kinds of sort of things that were being stated, which were influencing, which were influencing the opinion of the larger public, and that was what was actually being sought through language. So now looking at that, so that it opens. I mean, if we look at language and examine it that way, it opens up a very different kind of sphere of study for language. So there, we want to make sure, that whatever we are stating has, some kind of a counterpart in the world, vis-a-vis which it could be, deemed to be true or false. So in such kind of study, we would, rather put under the heading of semantics. So semantics basically is a study of meaning in terms of what a term stands for. So the term semantics basically comes from the Greek word semantikos, which means significant, or something that sort of signifies something. So, accordingly, in semantics, what we are sort of what we focus upon is mainly how certain certain terms come to mean something, come to signify something. And sort of what goes on when we utter a word, what exactly do we mean out there in the world, and sort of what is it through which the truth and falsity of what we are stating could be ascertained, and so on and so forth. So that becomes one area which sort of which got attention from a lot of philosophers, including Russell and including Wittgenstein and so on and so forth. The idea there was that there is a world out there, and language is supposed to through language we create a picture of that world. So this idea is called the picture theory, strongly put forward and adhered to by early position that Wittgenstein had on this issue. So according to him, through words we paint a picture about the world, and if that picture, each component of that picture, if it has some kind of correspondence, some kind of counterpart in the actual world, then we say, well, this statement truly pictures the world, or truly mirrors the world out there. But then, a different set of question arises in the sense that, if we are studying language and how it works, how, how, meaningfulness becomes possible in language, then, it leads us to a sphere, say, in a certain sense, which needs to be beyond language. In the sense that if there is a phenomena of which I am myself a part, then I can never get a space, outside of that phenomena to, to have an objective view of that phenomena. Now, similar problem occurs when we talk about language also. So, even in the sphere of language, if I'm studying language, then I need to be to have an objective look at how language functions. I, in a certain way, require some kind of a space outside of language. But the matter of fact is, there is no outside of language. There is, in a certain way, no way of going outside of the language and studying it. Given that to be the situation, outside of the sphere of language is the realm of silence. So therefore, early Wittgenstein, in his early work, Tractatus, he says, study of language in a certain way leads us to the realm of whereof we cannot speak. So he says, whereof we cannot speak, thereof we must be silent, or that we must pass off to silence. So, what it means to suggest is, overall idea, that here is that the study of language in such way, in this way, has a certain difficulty also, namely that to have an objective, view of language, we need to go outside of language, and there is no outside of language. There is, outside of language is silence. And you cannot study language, within that sphere. So these are then later Wittgenstein suggests the view that there's something wrong with the kind of philosophical issues that we have been raising about language. So he takes a completely different turn, and he says that. Language is not designed to, to answer the questions that philosophers raise about it. Language exists for an entirely different purpose. Language is there for, is designed to do, something entirely different. And that something different is, common communication. Common, talking that we do, and but the arena of communication, arena of talking in language, is so absolutely vast that it cannot be brought under one definite structure. There is no definite structure that comes forth given the variety of given the variety of discourses, the variety of things that we, variety of kind of things that we do with language. So each time we talk with somebody, we are engaging ourselves with what Wittgenstein calls game. The German term for that is Spiel. So each time we engage and talk with somebody, we are playing a language game, and each language game has certain kind of uniqueness about it, and all these language games, all these different discussions that we have had in our entire life, all these different discussions that are presently maybe going on in the world, in different parts of the world, if we want to put them together under one structure, there seems to be nothing coming forth. So, what he suggests is that there are only resemblances, what he calls family resemblances. There is no, proper kind of a design, no proper format that comes forth to us. There is only, this amorphous kind of crisscross pattern, similarities and dissimilarities that, come forth. So later Wittgenstein, from a sort of different kind of study that he wanted to do earlier, he sort of makes a different kind of he draws a very different kind of conclusion about a language in his later phase, in his famous work, Philosophical Investigation. So what he says there is that one definite structure is never forthcoming when we are talking about this language. So now that earlier way of looking at language, namely to see it how different words in language are able to denote some things out there in the world. Does the language reflect? Does the structure of language reflect the structure of the world? Does language mirror the world? Is language capable of saying everything that could ever be stated about the world? These were some of the earlier questions, that different philosophers were working with. How to ascertain truth and falsity of statements, and so on and so forth. And now, in the later phase, Wittgenstein, turns it, it goes into a different sphere that is more, characterized by what we could call pragmatics. So language, is designed to work in a different way. So to study language, we just need to see how it works. Language is a phenomena, is something that is designed to function. And if you want to study it, then you cannot study it in isolation from the function that it performs. So because then sort of it'll yield different set of results to us. So since it's a phenomena, we'll have to study it in along with its liveliness. We'll have to study it in action. And when we study it in action, then we find that language was not designed, to answer the kind of questions that earlier Wittgenstein, that Russell was, asking about language. So according to him, language, is made to function for purpose of communication, and that function is being performed absolutely fine by language. So we'll continue our discussion along this line. We'll meet shortly after this break. Thank you. Welcome back, viewers. So we were talking about the different ways in which we could study language as as a part of the discipline of philosophy. Under that, we saw how Semantics is one area, of study of language, but then there is another sphere of study of studying it also, namely pragmatics, and early Wittgenstein and some other set of philosophers were more concerned with the semantic aspect of language. And Wittgenstein, in his later phase, turned his attention towards what we could call pragmatic sphere of language, where we just want to study language. When we want to study language while it performs its function, in the sense that language is designed to perform a certain function, which is namely to be able to communicate our ideas, and that it seems to be doing well. So later Wittgenstein says that language is not an engine idling. It's not something that is static. It's a working phenomena. It's a vibrant phenomena. It's a lively kind of a phenomena. And when we study it, when we study philosophy while language is at work, then there's a different set of elements that are thrown open to us, and we realize that language doesn't have any kind of absolute structure about itself, any definite structure about itself. And a similar kind of a view is taken. So pragmatics overall, is a sphere of studying language where we want to look at how language, apart from its truth, functional aspect, how it is able to convey meaning, how is meaning, conveyed across and is understood. So, as I said earlier, also in this sphere, one important philosopher is Hilary Putnam, who points out that there are several different things going on, when we use language, and there could be conventional meaning which words always carry about themselves, but also there is always an implied meaning in a conversation. So when I say I am tired, what it means is that I am in a certain state of mind and body, but at the same time, so this is the conventional meaning of the sentence, I am tired. So, but when if somebody asks me if I would like to accompany them to the market, and I say I'm tired, then the implied meaning there would be, sorry, I would not be able to accompany you to the market. And so, in a conversation, in an ordinary conversation, both of these things are going on. So, what he calls conventional implicature. So what it means is that, say for example, if we say that person A, Ram is thin but courageous. So, if we talk about its truth functional aspect, then we know that the conjunction but is considered as and, as a kind of a conjunction in the matters of truth functions. So what it would mean is that person A is thin and person A is courageous. So the sentence would be true if both the sides of this conjunction are true, that the person is thin as well as the person is courageous. But if somebody says she's this person is thin but courageous, that would, though truth functionally the same kind of functions would apply, but the addition of the element but brings out a contrast between being thin and being courageous. There may there may be no contrast as a matter of fact, but somebody might want to suggest this contrast. So therefore, this is something that brings in the element of what is called implicature. That Hilary Putnam talks about. So as a system of conveying our intention to the other, as language as when it performs its function of communication, we find that this conventional implicature is happening all the time. So what is meant to suggest here is that pragmatics could be another area under which we could philosophically examine language. And then yet another very important area is also semiotics. Now, semiotics is under the study of semiotics, we consider a language as as a totality of a system of science. So what it means is that language mainly functions through signifiers. So each word works as a signifier of something. But it's also a total system. I mean, like in the sense that whenever we talk about language, there are that language has sort of a large number of words in it. And these words are supposed to be signifiers of something or the other. And there is a particular system that goes on through which so there is a kind of similarities, dissimilarities within that system. So there is a system within under which, when these signifiers are put together, it starts sort of functioning as a language. So therefore, when we study language, as a system of science, as a set of science, which are brought together under a particular system, and when we try to understand that system, when we want to in a certain way sort of explicate, bring to the fore, throw into relief that kind of how that system kind of works, then in a certain way we are engaging in a kind of a semiotic analysis. So it could be broadly also understood in this way. So say for example when we see, I mean, language could be broadly understood as a kind of a machine functioning, which has different components to it. So words, if we take signifiers or words which are supposed to signify, which always work as signifiers. So if we take, those words or signifiers as the different components of a particular machine, then then language could be considered as sort of a machine at work. And it happens when these signifiers are brought under a particular system, in a particular structure. Only then sort of through that systematization, putting things in places, that this system becomes functional. This system starts representing itself as a totality, as a kind of working machine. So when we study language as a system of science, and when we try to study the system which sort of through which these science, by their when they come under when they are mutually reciprocated, how they start functioning as a system, this kind of study we call semiotics. There have been several philosophers who have been associated with such kind of study, but one dominant name is Saussure. So, but we will talk about these things maybe in a greater detail at some other time. But today's lecture we want to just focus on. In a slightly more detail, we want to focus on what could be the different ways of studying the language, and another way is syntactical study. Syntax basically means rules that govern certain rules that govern the structure within the language, the structure of a sentence, and so on and so forth. Now, also corresponding to this, there is another kind of division, there is another kind of classification, categorization of different kind of study regarding philosophy of language is made, namely internalism, externalism, and innatism. So, in internalism, we want to look at the language as mainly, primarily performing the function of putting our intentions across to the other. So, basic idea here is that meaning basically refer. So under semantic study, when we are looking for the meaning. So, suggestion here is that a meaning refers to a state of mind rather than a state of the world. So, focus here is more on the state of mind. So, when somebody asks us what exactly do we mean by meaning, then an internalist would suggest that meaning is a state of mind. Meaning is in the mind. Meaning basically refers to the intention that we or the state of mind that I have that I want to be reached across to the other. So this is what we could call an internalist take on the issue of meaning. So there is an internalist way of looking at the study of language. So here sort of say for example one such philosopher is again Herbert Paul Grice. What he suggests is that the meaning basically is intention in the mind. So if something is said and is understood, so then we can properly say that what has been said has actually been understood by the other if three things happen. One is that I say something with an intention, with a certain intention. The other person understands that this something was intended to be understood by him, and thirdly, combining the other two conditions, that the other understands something along with the fact that something was intended by the speaker to be understood by the listener. So when these three things happen, then the meaning is properly, or the intention of the speaker is supposed to have actually reached out to the listener. So this is one way of looking at language, where we just want to consider language as sort of with reference to its meaning as something that is inside our mind, as if it refers to some state of mind. Now, an important question here, also arises: is there some kind of a counterpart to it in Indian philosophy? So, wherever possible, if we believe that there are certain counterparts to some of the issues in Indian philosophy as well, we would always try to bring them out. So, if we look at Indian philosophy, then we find that this internalist take within philosophy of language is more dominant than externalist kind of a view within Indian philosophy of language. And partly the reason for that is that Indian philosophy primarily focuses on two things. Most the inquiries that are conducted, that are initiated within Indian philosophical texts are goal-oriented, are aimed towards getting liberation or moksha. And it is from the point of view of that ultimately that all the inquiries need to be looked at. Another important theme in many of the Indian philosophical texts is that of what is called as iti kartavyata. Meaning to say, ascertaining ascertaining one's duty, ascertaining what is called one's dharma. So, Mimamsaka especially focus on this aspect of language. So there, the intention behind the text, it could be the written text, and it could equally apply to the spoken words. So that intention behind the words becomes important. So there, the kind of model that is suggested by the Mimamsakas is that when I speak, there is some kind of intention inside my mind which I want to reach across. Even when I read a text, say for example Vedas, there is some kind of an intention that is imbued within the text. That is called Shabdi Bhavana, which the sort of the Vedas, the Vedic words are presented with. So initially, like whether we are talking about a speaker or the text, it all begins with an intention to speak. With some kind of an intention, some kind of what is called bhavana. So first of all, there is some kind of a bhava, state of mind, bhavana, intention that I have inside my mind, which I want to convey to the other person. So second thing about that is that I have to deliver it, and delivering it requires some kind of a medium. So now deliverance or sort of conveying forth, the term for that generally used is abhidan. Abhidan requires some kind of means, namely karan. So for that purpose, we formulate our thought in some kind of words, and these words are imbued with the intention with which I utter them out. So this intention basically is supposed to run through these series of words that I speak. This is this intention is what binds them kind of together and gives them the structure or the force, the imperative force of a command. So it's only through this intention that an ordinary statement comes to be imbued with imperative force, because there is a certain bhavana behind it, there is some kind of an intention behind it. And when this intention, and when this expression or abhidan is delivered to the other person, called prapak, and the person sort of who intends to say something is called prekshak. So when it reaches out there, then it is collected by that person, and when it's collected in the same manner, then since the intention, the initial intention, the initial bhavana, the initial bhava, the state of mind, runs through those series of words, therefore the same gets unpacked when the words are collected by the listener. And when it's unpacked, when that intention is unpacked, then the listener or the reader is instigated, instigated to perform the function that is being commanded by that imperative sentence, by that prescriptive sentence. We should also understand here that for Mimamsakas, especially for Prabhakar Mimamsakas, the Vedic texts are all injunctives. They are all, of the nature of prescriptions. They are not descriptions of anything. So for Prabhakara's Vedic word, has only one function to perform, namely that it comes along with a prescriptive force, comes along with an with some kind of an imperative force, and it kind of impinges upon us and induces us, and sort of, so to speak, unleashes that moral force unto us, and through that we are instigated to perform certain functions in a certain way, which are conducive to what could be called dharma, the moral fabric of the world, or the moral order of the world. So what happens under the scheme of things is that the bhavana, or the intention through which a sentence is spoken out, the same is unpacked when it is collected at the other end by the listener, by the prapak. And then the moment that happens, that force instigates, that moral force that is unpacked in that sentence, instigates the reader, the subject, to perform a particular kind of action. So now, if we look at this kind of model of language use or language function, then we find that it's a dominantly internalist kind of take on the issue of language. So this way we find that in Indian philosophy, so especially as far as Mimamsakas are concerned, if we were to decide about whether it's an internalist theory or an externalist theory or an innatist kind of an explanation about language, then the most probable answer would be that it's a kind of internalist theory of meaning. Now, another take on the issue is externalism, which we have discussed already in some detail, where we believe that through language we determine meaning. So it's not that within language the meaning is already sort of determined within the language, and basically we should study it in this aspect of what state of mind is suggested when words are spoken, and what kind of state of mind is understood, implies understanding of things. So here we study language in the context of how it relates to the actual state of affairs in the world. If you look at Indian philosophy, from this point of view, we find that Nyaya system works with certain kind of belief about language, which is which comes very close to externalist take on the issue. So for Nyayikas, there is a certain order, there is a certain structure that that is already there in the world. And the same structure, is reflected in the world of in the world of language, and the same structure is there in language. So therefore, when we study language, when we study the structure of language, then in a certain way we are also studying the structure of the world. So therefore, one of the important texts of Navya Nyaya is called Bhasha Pariched. analysis of language. So namely, the effort there is, the aim there is that if we analyze language, if we do the paricheda, if we do the analysis of language, then the structure that would come forth to us is also the structure that is actually there in the world. So we study the sphere of language with a view to understand the actual state of affairs, the world as it actually is. So under this scheme of thing, language, knowledge and the world, they are different sort of dimensions of the same reality, so to speak. So when we are when we talk about when we analyze ontology of the world, then the same gets reflected in language also. Therefore when we study the world in a certain way, then we are also by in the same stroke studying the language as well. When we study language, we are also studying about when we are studying about the structure of language, then we are also studying about the structure of the world. So if we look at it from this point of view, then we realize that Nyayikas being a school of realism, and they also believe in plurality of things. So things are individually also real, not only they are real in generic terms, in some universal terms, but individually also they are real. So they are a school of realism and pluralism, and therefore a natural outcome of that would be that they have an externalist point of view when it comes to the study of language. Now, yet another take on the issue is what we could categorize as innatism. Innatism, as the term itself suggests, refers to the idea that language is mainly in there, is already inside our mind. So just as we know that innate ideas are supposed to be certain ideas that we are born with, that that always exist within our mind, and therefore there is no question to the truth of them. So similarly, a language is supposed to be some kind of when we talk about innatism, I mean in this under this belief, the main idea is that language is something that is already there inside our mind. So just like language is a function of mind. So just like we have different organs. Through eyes we see, we are able to smell through our nose, we are able to hear. Similarly, if we are able to, so to speak, language, if you allow me to use the word language as a verb, so we are able to engage ourselves in linguistic activities. So this is, we are able to perform this function, just like we are able to perform the function of seeing, function of smelling, hearing, and so on and so forth. And different organs that we have are designed to are designed in such a way so that they are able to perform those very functions. So similarly, language is also a kind of a function that we perform. Languaging, is a kind of a function of a certain kind in that way, and there is something inside of our mind that that through which we are able to do it. So language is there inside the mind. That's the main idea, and this idea was dominantly propounded and propagated by Noam Chomsky. But if we look at Indian philosophy, one dominant name that comes to our mind is Bhartrihari, who also believes and his ideas are also used in the area of arts and aesthetics, where the idea is that that there is some level inside our mind where the ideas arise and are encoded and put forth. So about this, we'll talk more around these lines. We'll look more specifically at other problems that that we come across within Indian philosophy in our next lecture. Thank you.
Dear friends, due to paucity of time, we have to stop our lecture here. On that note, we would like to thank Dr. Verma for coming to our show for this wonderful lecture. On that note, thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.